Welcome to the 18th set of exchanges that we are having as we discover the well-being curriculum. And in this concluding session, we are discussing the utility of skepticism. So, part 4 takes a skeptical approach to ideas of all these 17 lectures that we have given and gives answers. And let's begin with skepticism about the God idea. Ancient wisdom recognizes the utility of skepticism for progress. Even when we buy a mud pot to store water, we knock on the surface to test if the mud has been baked properly. Hence, for storing any idea and using it to replenish energy of life, a test through skepticism is valid in ancient tradition. So we will try to test some points raised in the earlier 17 sessions now. A curriculum design should be first tested in the crucible of skepticism. So let us test the first basic idea of God. Is it relevant and why is it used? Is the purpose of this idea to create a priestly class? Many scientists rebelled against dogmatism set by priests. Was dogmatism a misinterpretation of the spirit or the essence? Is the idea of God to improve the quality of understanding of ourselves and therefore improve the quality of life in society? The concept or idea of God is used initially in Sanatana Dharma. Later texts state that the essence or spirit of this idea of excellence filled with goodness is present within all and within everything. How to realize and live in this spirit is the purpose of education. Realizing it fills society with excellence and goodness. That is how we have seen the journey till now. But is this a valid interpretation? Is skepticism about even the God idea a part of ancient wisdom's tradition? Britannica.com states something about the oldest known text in human history. Does that text question God idea, the God idea? So let me quote from Britannica.com. I quote, "In the same book of the Rigveda, mythology begins to be transformed into philosophy. For example, in the beginning," and the text Britannica.com is now quoting the Rigveda. "In the beginning was the non-existent, from which the existent arose." This is what the Rigveda says. So Britannica.com continues, "Even the reality of the non-existent is questioned." So Britannica.com finds that God is treated as non-existent and even the idea is open to skepticism. So let me quote from there. I quote, "Then there was neither the non-existent nor the existent," unquote. Such cosmogonic speculations continue, particularly in the older Upanishads. Originally, there was nothing at all or hunger, which then, to satiate itself, created the world as its food. Alternatively, the creator creates himself in the universe by an act of self-recognition, self-formulation, or self-formation, unquote. This is what Britannica.com is saying. So the emphasis on self-recognition is the purpose of education. It all boils down to how humans visualize themselves, self-recognition. Doing so should lead to balance within, in society, and the conception of life should create a balance of social order with nature. This is the first test. Why reductionism may be trying to realize wisdom's philosophy in a material world? Is there any evidence of our speculation on this in the earlier lectures? So let us again rely on a statement by Britannica.com on the oldest known text in human history, the Rigveda. What is the approach that the text takes? If this is the oldest approach in human history, it is obvious that any approach of reductionism has come later. It may be speculated logically that the later approach may possibly be trying to replicate the approach which was earlier to it, or it may be testing the validity of the earlier approach, or that some aspects of the earlier approach philosophy may have been applied in life by scientists and found valid or useful. Then the philosophical approach by these scientists may have been extended by their minds to see if it is valid in the physical world also. There can be no evidence for this. But just as scientists speculate on many theories based on indirect evidence, we seek the same from Britannica.com statement about the 5,000-year-old text. Let us remember that to make people understand a concept, Jesus used parables. Hence, first a story is told. Then its significance or philosophy is remembered by all, absorbed and applied in life. So, let me quote. I quote, one of the favorite myths of the Vedas attributed the origin of the cosmos to the god Indra after he had slain the great dragon Vritra, a myth very similar to one known in early Mesopotamia. With time, such tales were replaced by more abstract theories that are reflected in several hymns of the 10th book of Rigveda. These speculative tendencies were among the earliest attempts of Indian philosophers to reduce all things to a single basic principle, unquote. That's the Britannica.com. The Rigveda is the oldest among the Vedas, which date 5,000 years ago. So, if sense perception is not the basis of using the human body, now let's go to the next skepticism about the next point. That if sense perception is not the basis of using the human body, what alternate visualization should be the basis? It is right to ask that why should I not believe what I see, hear and listen? It is right to ask that question. The answer is that the same sense organs were created for using and they serve a purpose. Denying their role and purpose is like denying any other part of the body. So ancient wisdom just points out that an awareness is needed about the limitations of the sense organs. Hence, they are the primary tools of investigation, the sense perceptions. But the mind should not be limited by their observations. Just as the mind itself is invisible, it should try to perceive that which is invisible, the spirit, the essence. However, the mind needs guidance for doing this. This is the role of the intellect, which again is invisible. Are the mind and intellect not more powerful than the sense organs? If the brain and mind are just secreting thoughts as the liver secretes bile, we can give prime importance to sense perception. However, the 20th century has seen that this was no longer the basis of understanding science, even though the carry forward of interpretation of scientific theories was from a mind-intellect neutral interpretation of data of science. We saw that humans react to situations depending on ideas and visualizations that they have. We've seen it in earlier lectures. Should these visualizations be based on fear and greed? We have seen evidence in medical journals that humans react when in fear in the same manner as lower order of species. Can humans not do better? What self-visualization can enable that? The idea of ancient wisdom is to free the human mind from tendencies that are shared by lower order species. The idea of this is to realize the human potential that is hidden in each individual. Hence, parents are regarded as the early teachers, not only because they gave birth, but also because they gave the first lessons in discrimination. Each child would have followed instincts and native intelligence that is shared with the animal kingdom if they had not been taught hygiene and the way of doing things by parents. The first ability, which is to use a language, the self-visualization of having good habits was formed in children by parents. The process of imparting such discrimination continues in the schooling years. It requires discipline to use intelligence with discrimination. A sense of discrimination is developed through guidance by those who are experienced. What is their alternate visualization of how to use the human body? What do they direct their sense perception towards, these experienced people? What do they direct their sense perception towards? The same sense organs visualize humans as a digesting duct, or the functions of the mind in the body being similar to the liver secreting bile. How does ancient wisdom sense perception see the use of the body? What visualization does their education achieve? The visualization of the human body that ancient Indian wisdom seeks to achieve in the individual is best described by the Sanskrit mantra Paropkaram Idam Shariram. The visualization of the way to use the human body is for the good of all and everything. This is the perception that the sense organs are trained to visualize through practices of discipline. Such visualization expands the idea of self to include others and everything. It inculcates an inborn desire to seek non-zero sum solutions to all apparent problems. This is changing the very idea of oneself. It fulfills Professor Sir Cary Cooper's desire that we should treat everyone as we would like our own children to be treated. It is obvious that sense perception has not been able to do it. A dependence on sense perception as the first way of knowing leads to a desire for sense gratification. This is the difference between present approach of education and ancient Indian wisdom's approach to education. So how can ancient wisdom prevent social pain? Let's address this skeptical question. We have addressed till now the earlier skeptical questions about the concept of God, and we have addressed why, if sense perception is not the basis of the human body, what alternate visualization should be the basis. This is another skeptical question which was raised. Earlier to this, the skeptical question was raised that why do you try to make a claim that reductionism is just trying to realize wisdom's philosophy in a material world? So after answering these skeptical questions, we now proceed to the next skeptical question: how can ancient wisdom prevent social pain? So there is a difference between current ideas and ancient ones. This is the way we answer the skepticism. The present approach starts with 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic. The ancient approach starts with practices. Just as the mother and father teach hygiene to a child, ancient wisdom proceeds with mental hygiene through practices. These practices lead to a hygiene of the mind, and it is these practices which prevent social pain. The 3 R's may be considered as the necessary condition for education, but the graph of OECD proves that they are not a sufficient condition. That is why this course is only offered to students who are ready to try to speak the truth as a personal commitment. Because without practice, social pain cannot be alleviated. If the desire to make the effort is not there, results cannot be achieved. The desire is inborn if mental hygiene has been created earlier. Hence, the approach should start from the early years in primary and secondary school. However, schools train the children to get into the best colleges. The colleges become best only if they get the best jobs for graduating students. 2008 proved that crookedness of the mind led to higher salaries. Somewhere this chain has to be broken. The most important steps that have already been taken by Vidya Vahini curriculum, visualized and implemented in some schools. And we have seen the evidence of the results it has proved in society. We took 3 sessions to give the evidence. So how to hasten the process? The theoretical basis of ideas is being clarified to PhD students here, so that the change is not just bottom up from school to work, but from top down, from university to school also. This curriculum of research ethics using research methodology is setting the basis of acceptance of the ideas of ethics and method that prevent social pain. Without ethics and method, social pain cannot be prevented by the 3 R's just by themselves. So let's ask another question. Is the view given here a deviation designed to force a new curriculum? Even though we are using Stanford Encyclopedia, a skeptic can ask, are we deliberately putting things out of context? Are we forcing a point of view that the mind was ignored in human development till now? So these are good skeptical questions to ask. So how do we proceed to answer them? We have used till now in our quotations one source to avoid confusion and make our points easily verifiable. Also, the idea was to use the consistency of arguments of a credible academic source to create consistency in the arguments that we propound. However, some may feel that the quotations have been cleverly chosen and placed out of context here to prove the point of view of the importance of the mind being ignored. Again, to prove our point, we have indulged in long quotations to avoid this criticism. But to disprove this skeptical question, we will again have to resort to very long quotations. To answer such a possible criticism, we are again going to choose one source, like we choose Stanford Encyclopedia. We will use the work of H. Stapp, S-T-A-P-P, who did his PhD under 2 Nobel laureates at the University of California, Berkeley. He was invited by Heisenberg to work with him at the Max Planck Institute in 1969. He has argued for the relevance of quantum mechanics to consciousness and free will. Stapp's view of the neural correlate of attention is explained in the book Mindful Universe, Quantum Mechanics and the Participating Observer, published in 2007. Stapp has claimed that consciousness is fundamental to the universe. His work has also been supported in part by the Director, Office of Science, Office of High Energy and Nuclear Physics, Division of High Energy Physics of the US Department of Energy. We can even give you the contract number 76SF0098 under which he has worked. He credits Newman with the orthodox quantum mechanics, demonstrating mathematically the essential role of quantum physics in the mind. Stapp is also interested in the work of Ian Whitehead, whom we have mentioned as early as lecture 1. He proposes what he calls a revised Whiteheadianism and has written a chapter, Whiteheadian Process and Quantum Theory, in his book Physics and Whitehead, Quantum Process and Experience. Stapp's philosophy has been described as being influenced by both Heisenberg's physical realism and Bohr's idealism. So let us have a look at Stapp's view of development of science. Just in case skeptics feel that we are trying to push forward a particular point of view by misconstruing, misquoting, or cleverly quoting from, say, Stanford Encyclopedia and a few sources. So this is Stapp's view of development of science. And I quote, "This shift controverted the role of our conscious thoughts from that of passive observers of a causally closed physically described universe to that of active participants in an essentially psychophysical understanding of nature." Unquote. This is in the book Effect of Mind on Brain. As you can see that in the 19th century, Henry Stapp says that there was a mechanical conception of nature where Newton takes Descartes' ideas forward. In the 20th century, Planck, Heisenberg, Bohr, von Neumann created a psychophysical conception. And in 21st century, Henry Stapp's book discovers or talks about a physics-based understanding of how our conscious thoughts can affect our physically described brains. So that is how the progress of science is being said not just by us but by other scholars also. So while Stapp feels, like most academicians, that ideas earlier to 19th century ignored the mind, Stapp feels that, and I quote, again it's going to be a long quotation, but it proves that the point we have made in 17 lectures is not without support from the scientific stream itself. So I quote Henry Stapp. At the end of the 19th century, most scientists still viewed the physical universe as essentially a giant machine. This mechanical view emerged from the 17th century work of Isaac Newton, who built his conception of nature on the ideas of Descartes. According to Descartes, the universe is composed of two kinds of elements. The first consisting of elements, each of which occupies at each instant of time a definite region in space, and the second consisting of elements that include our human thoughts. Descartes allowed these two parts of nature to interact causally within our brains, but Newton specified that the motions of the elements of the first kind are completely determined by laws of motion that refer exclusively to elements of this kind. In Newtonian type physics, these elements of the first kind are, moreover, essentially mechanical, in the sense that they have been stripped of the experiential qualities that characterize our thoughts, such as the conscious awareness of feelings and the capacity to grasp meanings. Unquote. So don't look at just Henry Stapp's view also. We include Professor Chomsky of MIT's other viewpoint, And we repeat and expand on what we have quoted from Professor Chomsky's earlier work to explain, the view. Professor Chomsky says, and I quote, Newton demonstrated that one of the two substances does not exist. The properties of matter, Newton showed, escape the bounds of the mechanical philosophy. Not surprisingly, Newton was condemned by the great physicists of the day for invoking the despised occult properties of the neo-scholastics, unquote. Professor Chomsky further states, and I quote, Newton, however, argued that these ideas, though absurd, were not occult in the traditional despised sense. Nevertheless, by invoking this absurdity, we concede that we do not understand the phenomena of the material world. To quote one standard scholarly source, by understand, Newton still meant what his critics meant. Understand in the mechanical terms of contact action, unquote. This is Professor Chomsky stating. On his website, chomsky.com, he further argues, and I quote, it is commonly believed that Newton showed that the world is a machine following mechanical principles, and that we therefore dismiss the ghost in the machine, the mind, with appropriate ridicule. The facts are the opposite. Newton exorcised the machine, leaving the ghost intact. The mind-body problem, in its scientific form, did indeed vanish as unformulable because one of its items, body, does not exist in any intelligible form. Newton knew this very well, and so did his great contemporaries, unquote. This is Professor Chomsky's view. So MIT's Professor Chomsky also records similar evidence as Tapp about the impact of mechanical philosophy. Professor Chomsky on his website agrees that foundations of modern science were built on mechanical philosophy. He states, and I quote him, Nobel laureate Francis Crick, famous for the discovery of DNA, formulated what he called the astonishing hypothesis that our mental and emotional states are, in fact, no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. In the philosophical literature, this rediscovery has sometimes been regarded as the radical new idea of the study of the mind. To cite one prominent source, the radical new idea is the bold assertion that mental phenomena are entirely natural and caused by neurophysiological activities of the brain. In fact, the many proposals of this sort reiterate in virtually the same words formulations of centuries ago, after the traditional mind-body problem became unformulable with Newton's demolition of the only coherent notion of the body, of physical material, etc. For example, 18th century chemist philosopher John Priestley's conclusion that properties termed mental reduce to the organical structure of the brain, stated in different words by Locke, Hume, Darwin, and many others, and almost inescapable, it would seem, after the collapse of the mechanical philosophy that provided the foundations of early modern science and its critical intelligibility, unquote. This long quotation proves academic acceptability of our contention that education has been deeply influenced by mechanical philosophy. So this is our answer to the skeptics. Henry Stapp's idea of change in science is the same as we have presented. There is no difference. We are not imposing a point of view. We are not trying to create a case for a curriculum based on misrepresentation or cleverness or trickery. Stapp's idea of change in science is the same as we have presented. The view that 21st century is changing can be seen by the University of California, Berkeley's website. It has opened a Greater Good Science Center in 2001, and its approach has been to create well-being. To prove our point, a long quotation from the website of the center is due, just to prove this point. So allow me to quote. I quote, based at the University of California, Berkeley, one of the world's leading institutions of research in higher education, the GGSC, Greater Good Science Center, is unique in its commitment to both science and practice. Not only do we sponsor groundbreaking scientific research into social and emotional well-being, we help people apply this research to their personal and professional lives. Since 2001, we have been at the fore of a new scientific movement to explore the roots of happy and compassionate individuals, strong social bonds, and altruistic behavior, the science of meaningful life. And we have been without peer in our efforts to translate and disseminate this science to the public. Unquote. Hence, the ideas that we have presented fulfill not only the World Economic Forum's and OECD's goals, but also the desire of eminent educational institutions of the world since the turn of the century. This is our answer to skepticism. Professor Chomsky also agrees that 21st century beckoned a change in academic thought. A change in academic thought is occurring. It is moving away from 19th century ideas. The new thought seeks to fulfill the findings of the 20th century. The desire of OECD, World Economic Forum, and universities like the University of California, Berkeley, and many academic scholars is an indication of this change. Our course on research ethics using research methodology seeks to fulfill the aspirations of the 21st century. We have seen Stapp's view in the chart shown earlier. How does Professor Chomsky record the beckoning of the 21st century to human thought? We requote what he writes for the Science and Faith Foundation of the Vatican. I quote, "The last decade of the 20th century was designated the decade of the brain. In introducing a collection of essays reviewing its results, neuroscientist Vernon Mountcastle formulated the guiding theme of the volume as the thesis of the new biology that things mental, indeed minds, are emergent properties of brains, though these emergences are produced by principles that we do not yet understand." Unquote. Thus, the last decade of the 20th century was prepared for the change that is occurring and the objective that this very course is serving. Hence, there is a scientific validation in our approach. It is not a random activity, but a fulfillment of a goal that is a millennial goal. Academic research starts exploring new things now. Edsel Cardena is the Thorsen Professor of Psychology at Lund University, Sweden, where he is director of the Center for Research on Consciousness and Anomalous Psychology. He has co-edited with Michael Winkelmann, PhD, a book on altering consciousness. This is a multidisciplinary overview of altered states of consciousness. It seeks to show how this study is necessary to gain a fundamental understanding of human culture, history, and biology. The book has been described on the ABC Clio website as follows, and I quote, "Altered consciousness is one of humanity's most mystical and life-altering aspects. These remarkable changes in mental state have understandably been a topic of general interest in scientific inquiry across time." Unquote. This is a 2-volume set that explores psychology, biology, neurology, science, history, arts, and the humanities and literatures on consciousness, from general readers to scholars and researchers. International contributors address altered states of consciousness from the perspectives of history, evolution, psychology, culture, literature, human biology, contemporary science, and society in these 2 volumes. They seek causes, effects, and meanings of altered consciousness. The first volume, I quote, provides an introduction and centers on the importance of altered states in history, culture, and the humanities, while the second volume presents biological and psychological perspectives on altered consciousness and examines their potential for healing and pathology. Unquote. The search for an integrated view of knowledge thus has already begun in academics and human search. We use ancient wisdom to guide its philosophy. While current search may seek multidisciplinary perspectives, wisdom's perspectives can be applied across all disciplines. Academics is already using the beginnings of our ideas. To prove this point, we indulge in another long quotation from the introduction to the Matter Mind Consciousness seminar for freshmen at the University of California, Berkeley in 2017. David Presti introduces the seminar as follows, and I quote David Presti. Everything we know as appears to come to us by way of our mental experience, our thoughts, feelings, perceptions, and conscious awareness, unquote. He goes on to say, and I quote, some argue that the investigation of this mind-body relation is the most interesting question in all of science. We will consider this question from the perspectives of neuroscience, biology, physics, and philosophy. It is my opinion that for cognitive science and neuroscience to truly get to the next place of deeper understanding of the mind-body relation, revolutionary new developments will be required. This prospect makes the scientific study of mind a tremendously exciting arena to explore. Unquote. This was David Presti introducing the seminar, the freshman seminar on matter-mind consciousness at the University of California, Berkeley in 2017. He concludes, just as we conclude, and I quote him, study of the nature of mind necessarily is an investigation of who we are and how we are related to everything else we think we know about the universe. What could be more interesting than this? In this seminar, you will be introduced to perspectives on these questions found in few other places. Unquote. David Presti, University of California, Berkeley, 2017, seminar on matter-mind consciousness. Has modern science already created all the background for the understanding and application of ancient wisdom's philosophy? For we know that philosophy is critical for guiding all search and research, especially if the philosophy comes from a deep experience that sustains life and nature. So, in trying to see how current ideas may possibly converge with ancient wisdom, we have to indulge in another long quotation. This one is from the information philosopher. The two-stage models of free will put forward by many philosophers and scientists since William James in 1880s have described a self-determination that comes freely generated alternative possibilities. For STAP, these are the result of quantum processes in the brain, with an adequately determined will that reflects our values by selecting among the possibilities after evaluating them in accordance with our reasons, motives, feelings and desires, in short, to be consistent with our character. Here is a diagram of the two-stage model. The same article earlier states, and I quote, the basic question, however, is whether there is a rationally coherent possibility that is both compatible with all scientifically acquired data, yet intermediate to these two alternative possibilities of pure chance and pure determinism. The same article quotes Stapp in Mind, Matter and Quantum Physics in an earlier para. The philosopher Ian Whitehead speaks of such an intermediate possibility which is closer to the intuitive idea that our choices are, in some sense, self-determining, namely that they are conditioned by what has come before, yet are not strictly determined by the past, but are nonetheless not without sufficient reason. I think such a possibility is open, but to give this logical possibility a non-speculative foundation will require enlarging the boundaries of scientific knowledge. Can H. Stapp's logical possibility be given a non-speculative foundation as he demands? Is modern science open to Stapp's idea that this will require enlarging the boundaries of scientific knowledge? Albert Einstein believed that it is not possible to solve a problem by the same mindset that has created it in the first place. If the mindset of current ideas has created social pain, can we try to a possible explanation from ancient Indian wisdom's point of view? Can it be practiced in the laboratory of the mind to check its validation? For thousands of years, it is said that this has been done and there are claims of validation. Can we check the efficacy of the claims by following the practices of ancient wisdom? Stapp argues for the relevance of quantum mechanics to consciousness and free will. What is the philosophy that can guide? Is there any possible evidence that we have from the 20th century to take this risk? Has evidence in the 20th century that validates ancient wisdom been ignored in academics? Let us look at the period 1920 to 1947. In this period, the fifth shared value which we have not talked about, the shared value of non-violence, was practiced by a gentleman called Mahatma Gandhi. And in these 20 years, in the crucible of this practice, India attained freedom. And let us remember, the background of the world at that time was violence. There was a world war, and India attained freedom using non-violence. And then from 1920 to 47, this happened. In the 50s till 53, Time magazine records the efficacy of looting with selfless love. Acharya Vinoba Bhave's largest peaceful land transfer in human history, 4 million acres of land gifted to the landless by the rich landlords, only by using the power of selfless love. And from 1970s onwards, the evidence of 4+1 shared values that we have shared earlier for redesign of curriculum, that starts. So a lot of evidence is there in this 20th century. Why is this evidence not being incorporated in academics, in academic thought, in academic curriculum, in academic ideas? How will ancient wisdom look at this diagram? Let's look at it. Einstein is open to a different mindset interpreting things. Can we allow ancient wisdom's mindset to view this diagram? The critical point is the decision making point in each situation. With what viewpoint, attitude, character, values does an individual generate possibilities and evaluate alternatives? This is the critical skill that ancient wisdom imparts. Through its practices, it makes you think again to generate different possibilities, evaluate different alternatives, take a decision. Through various practices, speak the truth, righteous conduct, you generate different possibilities, evaluate alternatives differently, take a different decision. And this practice of thinking again has been incorporated since childhood. Your daily diary, your good habits, your help ever hurt never generates different possibilities, evaluates different alternatives, changes decisions. So the future and self-determination impact even though the past is fixed. This skill that is applicable at the decision-making point is called samskara. This is the skill, samskara. Education in this tradition uses practices to hone it in perfectly, and these practices are based on equal-mindedness. This is how theory transforms into practice using ancient wisdom. What makes the current problems recur? Ancient wisdom would state that we are still in the fixed past, even from previous births. Our inborn tendencies, our inborn desires, we can't help ourselves. That's the fixed path that we are stuck with. Previous births maybe. The samskara of education clears them away. As each individual has a unique past, ancient teachers taught different mantras to each student. That diksha of giving a separate mantra depending on their perception of your fixed path. These were suited to solve the complicated equations of each student's minds. These mantras are referred to as mathematical formulae by some researchers, like Immanuel Kasanovicz in the United States National Museum. You will find the book Yajurveda, Book of Sacrificial Formulae. He uses the word formulae. Thus, the teacher's experience could make them peep through observing the tendencies, peep into the past of students, just as mathematics is the basis of musical notes. It is also the basis of poetry. There may be a mathematical Newton's equal and opposite reaction when the mind interacts with the physical world. Is this how physical laws and laws of the mind impact consciousness, rebirth, and the different tendencies that are inborn in each individual? Is this how science of the mind and matter play within consciousness? These are the questions that ancient wisdom asks and explores. If mantra is a precise mathematical solution to unique individual problems, is there any scientific validation of such a claim? The National Center for Biotechnology Information on its website gives a research on Om and Gayatri Mantra, the one mantra that can be used by all. So another long quotation is needed, and I quote, "Scientific investigation also found that Yoga Mantra, sutras of scriptures, and religious chanting prayers had positive influence on many physiological and psychological functions of the body. For example, during both prayers and mantras, there was an increase in the synchronicity of cardiovascular rhythms when they were recited 6 times a minute. There was also an increase in baroflex sensitivity. These findings suggested that the recitation of the rosary and certain yoga mantras at specific frequencies induce favorable psychological and physiological effects. The significance of recitation of Om in 12 experienced meditators found subtle changes in mental state indicated by reduction in the skin resistance. The different types of meditation in Japanese Buddhism showed different brain regional activation. The recitation of Buddha name, Nenbutsu, activated the prefrontal cortex, and the Buddhist Sutra activated the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and the right parietal cortex. In a match-compared control study using chanting Vedic hymns showed improvement in the sustained attention in teenage school students of residential setup of similar ambience. Hence, the present study has been designed to evaluate the effect of chanting Gayatri Mantra on attention in school students. Unquote. Is mantra the only way? Are we trying to say that in our curriculum? Is ancient wisdom again going to become a dogma that it's only mantra? No. What is the touchstone for testing any practice? What about traditions which do not have the concept of a mantra or reciting a religious text? Are we trying to say that they are not valid? No. What about those who do not follow a god or any of the methods or practices discussed above? Are we saying that they have no good way forward? That is not the contention of ancient wisdom. We need to discover the essence of what they achieve. Interpreting the ideas discussed till now in that narrow light will again lead to dogmatism. Exactly what made science and scientists rebel against religion. What do these achieve? The touchstone is given in very simple language in 19th century by Maharshi Devanand Saraswati, considered as one of the makers of modern India by Dr. Radhakrishnan, India's former president, scholar president, and also Sri Aurobindo, etc. His call was taken up in 20th century by Lokmanya Tilak. Lala Lajpat Rai was deeply influenced by him. The Troika of Lal Bal Pal were the precursor to Mahatma Gandhi in India's independence movement. Lala Lajpat Rai, Lokmanya Tilak and Bipin Chandra Pal. Dayanand Saraswati ji wanted all to have practical training in sciences as given in the Vedas, and he criticized all religions if he felt that their practices deviated from the essence. Just like all scientists were fighting dogmatism in the 19th century, so was in India Dayanand Saraswati fighting against dogmatism in his own religion and in all religions. He believed that the religion he was born in had been corrupted by divergence from the founding principles, and its followers had been misled by the priesthood for the priest's self-aggrandizement. He propounded equal rights for women, and many of his social reform ideas were incorporated in independent India's constitution. He translated the Vedas from Sanskrit so that its knowledge became common and was not exploited by the priests and misinterpreted for their financial benefit. How did he view the essence? His translation in Hindi reads something like भाव उज्ज्वल कीजिए मुझे आत्मिक बल दीजिए. He translates the prayer of Vedas as that after taking refuge in truth, we pray to have feelings that are enlightened and thus experience the strength of the essence within each one of us. The touchstone of practice is that it should transform the feeling in the heart. It does not matter what practice you do. Does not matter whether you use a mantra or not, or do any of the practices given in the last session. The touchstone is that the feeling in the human heart should be transformed to help ever, hurt never, whatever technique you use. If the feeling is already transformed, no ritual is needed. So he concluded. His social reform movement rejected all rituals. He gave 10 principles. The first 5 principles speak of truth. The first 5 of the 10 principles speak of truth, while the last 5 speak of a society with nobility, civics, co-living and disciplined life. So we see the journey from the 19th to the 20th to the 21st century. Science was rebelling against religion, and here in India, spirituality was rebelling against religion and promoting science. The efforts to revive the spirit have continued from the 19th to the 20th to the 21st century. The evidence of the 20th century now beckons a new curriculum. So, mind, matter, consciousness and a new curriculum. A new thought is emerging by breaking out of old silos. Professor Chomsky on his website states, and I quote, contemporary science, I quote, contemporary studies of mind are deeply troubled by the explanatory gap between science of mind and neuroscience, in particular between computational theories of cognition, including language and neuroscience, unquote. He continues to explore the nature of thought and states, and I quote, for these quite different kinds of reasons, the great figures of the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment believed that there are phenomena that fall beyond human understanding. Their reasoning seems to me substantial and not easily dismissed. But contemporary doctrine is quite different. The conclusions are regarded as dangerous heresy. They are derided as the new Mysterianism. He then states, the new Mysterianism, I believe, is misnamed. It should be called truism, at least for anyone who accepts the major findings of modern biology, which regards humans as part of the organic world. Unquote. Can humans ignore that they should follow laws that everything else in nature is following? Are they part of nature or not? Professor Chomsky further states, and I quote, what enables us to grow legs and arms? And a mammalian visual system prevents us from growing wings and having an insect visual system, unquote. He further states, and I quote, "Thus, what is a mystery for rats might not be a mystery for humans, and what is a mystery for humans is instinctive for ants and bees," unquote. Nature is a study of limits for everybody and everything. For each species, this is what ancient wisdom says. This is called dharma, or the limits within which everything in the universe is operating. This dharma should guide human behavior also. That is righteous conduct. The time has come to answer questions that explore the standpoint of ancient wisdom. What is the view of ancient wisdom about the nature of creation, the nature of the mind-body complex, the role of humans in society? How these questions are answered in ancient wisdom is explored in part A of the book, How to Prevent Recession. Those who are interested can look at that. A new curriculum is not the end of our search, but a new beginning, for ancient wisdom is about lifelong learning. The World Economic Forum seeks lifelong learning as a skill needed for the 21st century. What develops this attitude? Ancient wisdom teaches that the nature of nature is change. Hence, the need to reskill oneself continually is the attitude it imparts. Professor Chomsky raises the question that what is instinctive for some species may be a mystery for humans. Hence, the frame of mind with which to view creation is important. Without understanding the significance of the human being and the significance of his or her role in nature, the way of living life will not be in balance. The application of all subjects should emerge from such an inner balance. Ancient wisdom's education creates this inner balance in a manner that sustains society and nature. The evidence given shows how human transformation creates well-being. Do forces of nature help to create prosperity when the concepts of ancient wisdom that lead to well-being are practiced? This hypothesis can only be tested by each individual in his or her own life. Education can only impart ideas. Their validation is given by life itself. The author of How to Prevent Recession found that his work coincided with stock market tops that help predict recessions. A global automobile major has recently invested 1.1 billion US dollars in a 536-acre automobile factory in the same district where well-being has been sought to be created through education. Spread over 536 acres, this greenfield plant uses the most advanced technology. It employs over 3,000 people, including its partners. An investment of 2 billion US dollars is being made here, creating indirect employment for 7,000. What forces of nature led to a choice of this district for investment? So, is prosperity a handmaiden of wisdom? If you plan for well-being of all and your motivations are to create well-being of all, will prosperity follow that? Each one of you have to judge for yourself by applying these concepts in your life. So ancient wisdom can only invite you. It invites you to test some of or all of its practices in life. For that is the beginning of its education. All practices have to be practiced always to enable lifelong learning. This learning is the biggest earning of society, the earning of well-being. With this, we bring this series to an end, but I hope our interaction does not end here. And society's interaction with well-being starts here. So this is not an end, but let this be a new beginning. With this hope and prayer, I thank you all for the time and attention that you have given to this course on research ethics using research methodology. I thank you for all the time that you have given to this lecture series. Thank you so much.